No one noticed when she walked in, not because she tried to hide, but because nothing about her demanded attention. She chose the corner seat, back to the wall, eyes on nothing in particular, the kind of stillness people mistake for emptiness. But the bartender paused once, just for a second, like something didn't quite add up. If you've ever seen someone quiet and felt like there was more to them type, not what she seems below. The bar near the base had a specific texture to it, the kind of place that doesn't try to be anything other than what it is. Low amber light, the kind that softens everything without quite warming it. A few tables scattered without much planning. Stools along the counter where the regulars sat with the comfortable authority of people who had claimed their territory so long ago it no longer required defending. The sound was layered voices at different volumes, the occasional scrape of a chair, music coming from somewhere that nobody was particularly listening to. It was the sound of people who had finished something difficult and were in the process of letting the day leave their bodies. She came in sometime after the first hour of the evening. No announcement. No pause at the door to scan the room in any obvious way. She moved through the space the way water moves, finding the path of least resistance, taking up the minimum necessary room, arriving at the corner table as if she had always been heading there and it had always been waiting for her. She was around 35. Not in uniform civilian clothes, plain and practical. Nothing that marked her as anything in particular. She didn't take out her phone. She didn't lean forward with the hungry social energy of someone who had come to be seen. She ordered once, quietly, and the drink sat in front of her more often than it was lifted. She just sat and observed. That was the part that didn't fit the room's normal vocabulary. In a place like this, people occupied their space with intention, conversation, or solitude, engagement, or deliberate withdrawal. The usual modes were legible, you could read them, but she was doing something different. She was present in a way that wasn't passive. There was nothing checked out about her. Nothing of the person who has simply chosen to tune the world out, but she wasn't participating either. She was watching, quietly, without any visible effort, and with the particular quality of attention that doesn't announce itself. The bartender noticed it first, not in a way he could have articulated clearly if pressed. It was more of a sense than a thought, the brief, slightly disorienting feeling of encountering something that your pattern recognition can't immediately file. She wasn't a problem. She wasn't sad or angry or waiting for something in the obvious way. She was simply calibrated differently than the room around her, like an instrument tuned to a frequency slightly outside the normal range. He set her glass down when he passed, didn't ask anything, but he looked once briefly, with the involuntary attention of someone whose instincts had flagged something they couldn't name, and then went back to the counter. The evening moved around her. She remained at its edge, holding a stillness that the room didn't quite know what to do with, that nobody was rude enough to comment on, and that sat in the back of the room like a question mark the night hadn't answered yet. There was a group near the center of the room. 4 of them, maybe 5, the exact number was hard to fix because they moved and shifted and pulled chairs from adjacent tables with the easy ownership of people comfortable in this particular space. They were loud in the way that isn't aggressive, not performing loudness, just genuinely unconcerned with the volume they were producing. They'd been there a while. The conversation had the loosened quality of people a few drinks in, past the early stage where you're still being careful with each other, into the territory where the real selves come out. One of them noticed her, not in an obvious way. His glance moved across the room with the reflexive attention of someone who naturally tracks their environment, and it landed on her corner for a moment longer than it landed anywhere else. He didn't say anything to the group. He didn't go over. He just held the look for a beat, turned back to his conversation, and let it go. But she had already registered it. Not through any visible reaction, her posture didn't shift. Her eyes didn't move toward him. Nothing in her expression changed. The registration was internal, complete, and entirely undemonstrated. She had clocked the attention, assessed it, and returned to her own observation in the space of a second. The group didn't know what to make of her. That was the thing. It wasn't that she made anyone uncomfortable. There was no threat there, no edge, nothing that read as hostile or unstable. But people like to know where to put other people. We organize the room in our heads, assign everyone a role: regular, newcomer, off-duty, waiting for someone, killed the evening, celebrating. The categories make the environment legible. She didn't fit any of them cleanly. The most interesting people in a room aren't the loudest. They're the ones who don't need to be. If you've ever noticed something subtle, others missed, type, "I see it" below. She had chosen her table with precision. That was visible, if you knew how to look for it. Corner position, maximum sight lines, minimum exposure. Back to the wall, which meant nothing could approach from behind without crossing her field of vision first. Clear line to both the entrance and the side exit. The posture wasn't rigid, but the positioning was exact. These weren't the choices of someone who had consciously thought through the geometry of the room tonight. They were the choices of someone for whom that geometry had become automatic, the kind of habit that doesn't require thought anymore because it has been trained so deeply it just happens. The way breathing happens, the way balance happens. You don't decide to do it. You just find yourself already doing it every time without noticing. The bar continued its evening. Glasses were refilled. The conversation at the center table grew and subsided and grew again. The music shifted once without anyone acknowledging it. And she sat in her corner, not lonely, not waiting, not lost or adrift or between things. Just fully present in a way that occupied no space and drew no attention, the particular composure of someone who has spent enough time in genuinely high-stakes environments that a bar on an ordinary evening registers as something close to silence. The room moved around her. She let it. Something was coming. Nobody could have said what or when, but the evening had the quality of a held breath, and in the corner, the stillness didn't waver. The door opened without drama. No particular sound, just the brief intrusion of outside air, the slight shift in pressure, the moment of adjustment that happens whenever an interior space makes contact with the world beyond it. Half the room didn't look up. The other half glanced over with the mild, reflexive curiosity that any entrance produces and then returned to what they'd been doing. The group that walked in was 4 men. They were dressed casually, which meant nothing. The civilian clothes fit them the way civilian clothes always fit people who spend most of their time in something else worn correctly but not quite naturally. Like a second language spoken with a slight accent. They didn't move with urgency. They didn't scan the room with the exaggerated alertness of people trying to look like they're not scanning the room. They just came in, and they stopped just inside the entrance, and the brief pause before they moved further was the kind you don't notice unless you're already paying very careful attention. They were looking for something, or someone. One of them moved his gaze through the space with the quiet efficiency of a process that had been done many times before in many different kinds of rooms, extracting information without appearing to request it, building a picture without announcing the construction. His eyes moved across the bar, across the group at the center tables, across the people at the counter, and then they reached the corner. He stopped. Not a visible stop, not a flinch or a step back or any physical demonstration of the recognition that had just occurred. It was the internal version of stopping, the way your entire processing realigns around a single data point without any of the reorientation showing on the surface. He looked at her for perhaps 3 seconds. She looked back the same way she had been looking at the rest of the room, with that same quality of complete, unhurried attention that had been sitting in the corner all evening. Nobody in the bar said anything, and then he stood straight. The adjustment was subtle, a very slight change in posture, a squaring of the shoulders, the particular physical arrangement of a person bringing themselves to formal attention without making a production of it. He raised his hand. The salute was clean and precise and completely silent. No words, no announcement, no indication to the room that anything was happening beyond this specific transaction between him and the woman in the corner. The others followed, not because they'd been told to, not after a look or a signal or any communication that the room could detect. They followed because they saw what he saw, and what he saw required only one response. 3 more men came to attention, and 3 more hands went up, and the corner of the bar that had spent the entire evening being unremarkable was suddenly, without explanation, the only place in the room. The bar stopped. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. The bartender, who had been moving with the continuous efficiency of someone who doesn't pause, paused. Chairs that had been shifting fell still. The music was still technically playing, but nobody was hearing it anymore because every person in the room had redirected themselves towards something that had no context they could quickly assign. 4 members of a SEAL team, in a bar, saluting a woman who hadn't told anyone her name. She didn't stand up. She didn't return the gesture with a mirror image of the formal salute. She didn't speak. She looked at him for a moment, just a moment. A beat of genuine recognition, something passing between them in the silence that required no translation, and then she gave a single, small nod. The kind that means, I see you, and yes, and thank you. All of it compressed into one motion, unhurried, complete. They held it for 1 more second, and then it was done. Nobody asked. That was the remarkable thing. In a room full of people with questions sitting visibly on their faces, nobody voiced them. The silence held for a moment after the salute ended, a collective breath, the entire bar suspended in the specific uncertainty of people who have just witnessed something they don't have the context to categorize, and then, very slowly, the room began to exhale. The 4 men didn't stay. They hadn't come for drinks, or if they had, that wasn't what mattered anymore. They moved back toward the door with the same unhurried efficiency they'd arrived with. No lingering, no backward glances, no performance of departure. They had come in, done the thing they'd come in to do, and they left. Like the moment had always been that brief. Like that was exactly enough. The bar took longer to restabilize than it normally would after any kind of interruption. Conversations resumed, but with the slightly altered quality of people who are still processing something in the background while doing other things with the foreground. A few people glanced toward the corner, not with the obvious invasive curiosity of people who want to interrogate, just the involuntary check of people who needed to confirm that she was still there, that the thing that had happened in the actual room and not in some shared hallucination. She was still there. The bartender walked over. He didn't say anything. He set down a fresh glass, not replacing an empty one, just placing it, an offering without a transaction attached, and he straightened up and moved away without meeting her eyes more than briefly. It was the clearest statement available to him. He had seen it. He understood, without understanding, that something about his earlier assessment of the corner had been insufficient, and this was how he could acknowledge that, without requiring her to explain. She looked at the glass for a moment. Then she settled back into the same posture she'd been holding all evening, back to the wall, eyes taking in the room, the particular stillness that had sat in that corner since she arrived. Except that now the corner was different. The room was different. Not because anything had changed structurally, not because she had moved or spoken or done a single thing she hadn't been doing before, but the silence around her had changed its character. It wasn't the silence of someone unnoticed. It was the silence of someone who no longer needed to be. Not every kind of respect needs to be explained. Sometimes it shows up in silence, and that's enough. The real power isn't being recognized by everyone. It's being known by the right people. Subscribe to Steel Heart Stories, Emma, for more stories where the quietest presence leaves the strongest impact.